You've spoken that you think it's a question of stupidity, of illiteracy, of innumeracy, but whatever the reasons are, one of the things that I've been trying to talk about in the course of this war, trying to draw people's attention to what monstrosity this is that has grown up under their noses of this violent anti-Israel movement, is that they're not only coming after Israel, they are a threat to the well-being of your free, liberal, democratic societies as well. When Mike Freer, the Member of Parliament for Finchley, has to step down because the Islamist threats are too much, when there is a cinema owner in Barcelona who refuses to host Israeli movies because his family have been getting death threats, when you have to change venue for a talk in London because the theatre decides to cancel you, this violent anti-Israel movement is trying to dictate to Western countries, to non-Jews as well, what they can say, who they can listen to, what they can do. And I'm wondering, do you see the beginning of a pushback against this?
Well, I'm certainly not doing what they want me to do.
And thank goodness you're not. But,
and I never will.
But are you a lone voice in the wilderness, or do you see others waking up?
Not at all. I have enormous support and much more in the UK and in the US and elsewhere. I'm not a minority. I'm not a minority in my own country. I won't be bullied or pushed around by some Islamist blowhard loudmouths. Of course not. I'm rather shocked, by the way. I mean, the Mike Freer case, there's two shocking things about it. One is that he was put into a position where he felt he had to step down. And the other is that there was so little, relatively little horror in the British media or political class that this had happened. I would say that if an MP had to stand down from Parliament because of threats from far-right white supremacists who have no meaningful role in Britain, then I mean, if that did happen, the whole country would be united in saying, how dare they do this? And what's more, would have protected the MP. The acceptance of the fact that Islamist threat exists in our society and that we might have to give in to it horrifies me. And I said, I mean, everyone has to make their own decisions, but I'm horrified by what Mike Freer decided to do and the manner in which he decided to do it. He has to make his own decisions about his life, but I would prefer the Conservative Party of Margaret, for instance. The day after the Brighton bombing, which very nearly killed Margaret Thatcher and her husband, that was intended to kill Margaret Thatcher and her husband, and killed her friend, killed a number of her colleagues, and very, very badly wounded others in the Brighton hotel bombing. She stepped out the next morning. The Conservative Party conference went on. She said, we do not give in to the men of violence. We do not give in to terrorism. The party conference will go on as normal. Now, that's the Britain I know.
Stiff upper lip, chin up.
More than that, tough, resilient. Don't give in to bullies. You don't give in to violence. You don't give in to terrorists. Never. Never. The idea that we've slipped so quietly and so relatively easily into this pacified people who can be pushed around by people who have no right to push us around is an outrage to me. And by the way, it's a darn fool position to find yourself to stand up for a man more than he's willing to stand up for himself. So I should just stress that Mike Freer, in an interview the week after he had to stand down from Parliament, said to an interviewer who asked him about the Islamist Ali Harbi Ali, who murdered Sir David Amis in his constituency surgery 3 years ago. Sir David was killed by a jihadist who was also apparently scouting out David Amis's house and the house of another MP friend of mine.
Mike Freer's house, you mean?
Mike Freer, and Michael Gove was also one of the targets. Now, Mike Freer was asked in an interview after he said he was going to step down because of threats by an interviewer, what was it that motivated Sir David Amis's murderer? And do you know what Mike Freer said?
No.
I don't know.
Because he's being silenced.
Right. Here's the thing. I have a lot of contempt for that. I think that's a contemptuous position to be in.
Contemptuous but difficult to
judge
someone who's coming under threats like that.
Look, yeah, well, a lot of people come under threats, and the threats get worse when the threats work.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things...
You know, there's an old saying out there that goes something like this, that unless you've walked in a person's shoes, don't comment on what their situation is. And there is validity to that statement. But then on the other hand, sometimes, and I think many times, we have to talk about that. Because even though we may not be in that situation, we certainly can say to ourselves, if I was in that situation, or if we were in that situation, what would we do differently? And then basically say that other person's opinion, whatever his reasons are, they certainly aren't mine. In the case of Mike Frey, the MP, for him to make that decision, listen, somebody's scaring you, bullying you, saying they're going to kill you. And they've not all, and people have done it in the past where these Islamists and Muslims have killed people in government, an MP prior to that. I think the gentleman Amos, the MP, Mr. Amos, there in England. Douglas basically says that when the MP, Mr. Fry, was asked the question, what do you think caused the jihadists or the Muslimists to kill that MP? His answer was he didn't know. And this, as Douglas was saying, he found just absolutely contemptuous. He just found it that how could somebody say this? Because Douglas would never have said that. But now stepping into this guy's shoes, this MP's shoes, he's scared. Not everybody has got that intestinal fortitude to stand up for what's right. What would have happened if Britain and Winston Churchill had given in to the Neville Chamberlain faction of the government of the United Kingdom at that time and had given in to Hitler? The continent, our whole way of life would have looked so much different. I'd be doing this YouTube video in German, in Deutsch. Basically, probably, I mean, or maybe Japanese. If we didn't stand up to the bullies, if we didn't stand up to the threats of fascism, of Nazism, of Islamism, of terrorism, of any of these isms, communism, Marxism, social, if somebody does, you've got to take a stand as a person. Then you've got to take a stand as a group, a community. Then as a nation, you've got to have a leader. Leaders like Margaret Thatcher, Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan, Donald, these are the people that you need to follow that are going to basically say, we're not going to cower to bullies. We are the ones. They strike at us, we strike back at them. Power through strength. Peace through strength. That's what you're talking about. So I know Douglas, and but listen, everybody's got to go their own way and decide how much are they willing to take in their life, the life of their family, the life of the community. What are they willing to stand up for? And does standing up for, the way of life, for democracy, to stand up to go against terrorism and fascism and Islamism, is it worth it, even if it means, you're sacrificing yourself or others? That's the question that has to be asked. Anyways, folks, that's what we have on tap for you today. Interview here with Douglas Murray and Elon Levy of the Israeli State of the Nation. Let's get back to that interview right now.
As
I
I'm
should
trying
have
to
said
speak
contemptible, not contemptuous.
Contemptible.
It's contemptible.
Contemptible. I think
I was so filled with contempt, I forgot the appropriate word.
I think we've had a good run of the English language in the podcast so far, but one little slip up is acceptable. I'm glad you mentioned this, because one of the things I'm wondering about when thinking about how we speak to foreign audiences in the UK, around the world, is there does seem to be a very large gulf in values between what is obvious and consensual within Israeli society and the way that Western societies see themselves. Western societies that have enjoyed a long peace since 1945. A long peace, by the way, secured through total victory over the enemy and means that would now be considered...
At whatever the cost.
At whatever the cost. Although I don't think that's a very useful phrase in the recent context. I prefer to say at zero cost if Hamas surrenders, and otherwise at minimum possible cost. But I want to bring up a poll that I saw recently that really disturbed me from YouGov, that asked young British people under the age of 40, 18 to 40,
Yes.
if a new world war broke out, which of the following would you do? Only 7% said that they would volunteer for military service. 21% they said they would not volunteer but would serve if called up. And an astonishing 38% said they would not volunteer and would refuse to serve if called up. 17% don't know. Another 17% think that they'd be given some sort of disability
By the way,
exemption.
they're a fascinating group, that last one. I don't believe the armed forces would want me to serve due to age or disability. Now, saying it's all 18 to 40-year-olds.
Correct.
Why do they think that if they're 18 to 40, that they wouldn't be allowed to serve due to their age? This is a group that didn't understand the question. Okay, so first of all, we've got a lot of dolts and or a lot of people who would fake being ill. Okay, that's not a very good statistic.
The numbers change only slightly if you ask, if Britain were at risk of imminent invasion, would you sign up? And still you have a very large minority that says it would refuse to serve even if the country were invaded, which to Israelis would be absolutely bonkers, because on the 7th of October, anyone who had a weapon and could go down to the kibbutzim and defend them or join the military, get called up for reserves, at least outside the Arab and ultra-Orthodox communities, although there too, and among the ultra-Orthodox, we're seeing an uptick in people enlisting. It was just so obvious that you have to defend your borders, you have to defend your home through force if necessary. And we don't want to have to do this, but if we have to, we will. And that message from the polling numbers that I'm seeing in the West doesn't seem to cut through, because you have such large numbers in the West who wouldn't physically defend their homes, even if they had to.
Well, the first thing is to say it wasn't as clear as it is now on October the 6th in Israel. Brothers in Arms and various groups got the security analysis in this country very badly wrong. As you know, there's an interview with four
You're saying with the threats that they wouldn't serve?
Well, I mean, you had soldiers and commanders saying that they would not serve in conflict. I thought that was absolutely unbelievable.
Of course, when the massacre happened, they dropped everything and went straight into action.
Right, which is a point we need to come back to. But just on this point of the definition of what was happening, very distinguished sons of this country, like Bougie Alon, interviewed on Israeli television, 4 of them on one interview. Then they say that that there is no existential threat to Israel from Hamas, and that Benjamin Netanyahu is a bigger threat than Hamas.
And if one thing is clear since October 7th, it's that we as a country dramatically underestimated the level of the threat and how dangerous things could get.
That's in a country which knows the threat, and has lived the threat in recent generations. So, of course, how much worse is it in countries that haven't known war for generations?
And do you think that's part of the reason that we as Israel are clearly struggling to cut through in public opinion in the West?
Yes, because...
I mean, why in a word, is it so difficult for us to cut through?
Because the West believes that peace is the human norm, inheritance, and right. It's a human right to live in peace. It isn't.
Isn't it?
There is no such right. No such right exists in nature. It is a wonderful thing to have, but it can be taken away like all rights. It's the problem of the language of rights. The language of rights is taught as if rights exist like oxygen, and they don't. They only exist if they are fought for and maintained. And they can only be maintained if people who would threaten your rights, including your most basic rights like your right to life, are not allowed to succeed. There is no law of nature that makes peace the norm. It isn't the norm historically. We are deeply blessed to have lived in the past few generations in a world in which it was relatively the norm in Western democracies.
Thanks to total victory in 1945.
Thanks to total victory in 1945 and then again in 1989, 1990. And seeing off the 2 twin horrors of the 20th century of fascism and communism. But it is not the norm. But if you grew up in the post-war dividend, the post-Cold War dividend, you could easily come out with the misunderstanding that this was the normal state of human affairs. It isn't.
I did have a thought after the Ukraine crisis.
Wow, that's a stunning poll. Only 7% would serve if called up. It did say 21% said they would serve if, you know, if they were called up to do it, but they wouldn't volunteer. It would be very interesting. I think you'd see similar numbers, unfortunately, here in the United States of America and probably other Western democracies too. And I think the reason for that is that Gen Z, millennials, in the last 20, 30 years, those people that have been born, they weren't post-war children. They didn't see the horrors or know immediately of the aftermath of, the Korean War, World War II. And none of these things have actually hit the homeland. Yes, Hawaii, but I mean the mainland of the United States. Certainly, England took the huge catastrophic losses of being bombarded and attacked, by fighter jets and bombers, and also the V2 rockets, that were fired upon by Germany. So the older generation certainly knows, and certainly did their job, and were courageous, did the ultimate sacrifice, so that Europe and America, could remain free. But yeah, it'd be an interesting poll to see what would happen. How many in the United States of America would volunteer to serve if an imminent threat to the mainland, was going to occur by a foreign adversary? I mean, right now you see so many pacifists out there taking the side of the Islamists and the terrorists and the communist regimes and socialist regimes out there. It's unbelievable. Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasir. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel, like, share, and follow us. You all know what to do. Take a look at our other video links above and below. Comment. Love to hear and share what you think. My final thought is always, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.